Evening. My name is Dick Clay, and I'm the president and CEO of the Filson Historical Society. We're so glad that all of you are here with us this evening for what is going to be a memorable lecture. My Old Kentucky Home, the astonishing life and reckoning of an iconic American song with Emily Bingham. Emily Bingham is the author of Irrepressible, the jazz age life of Henrietta Bingham, and Mordecai, an early American family. Dr. Bingham graduated from Harvard University with a degree in history, and then obtained her master's and her PhD in United States history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She is married to Stephen Riley and is the proud mother of 3 children, Kason, Henrietta, and Jim Riley. Dr. Bingham has taught at Centre College, University of Louisville, and St. Francis High School, and she currently serves as a visiting honors faculty fellow at Bellarmine University. She was previously vice chair of the Filson Historical Society's board, and we hope that someday she will come back. I'll return to moderate questions after the presentation as time permits. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Emily Bingham to the Filson.
Okay. Thank you, Dick. Thank you so much. You've been a good friend, Dick, through this process in more ways than one, including long discussions about race and place. And I also want to call out so many staff members at the Filson who over the years have enabled my research and made it charming, especially since that renovation. And you really are too many to number. Tonight, I want to dedicate this talk to my mom, who's here. She is not a native Kentuckian. But she grew up here, and I mean, she raised me here in this amazing state that is so complex and so beautiful and so full of tensions. And I love her. She loves history. She loves place. She loves understanding what place means. And I honor that in her, and I feel lucky to have gotten it from her. You all have been, I'm a teacher, you heard that. And I had a handout today. So some of you may have, anyone have this handout? I just want to make sure you have it because there will be a few times in this lecture where I may refer to it. And if you don't, someone in the back has more copies of them. It is simply a sheet with the lyrics of Stephen Foster's original My Old Kentucky Home, Good Night from 1853. But that really brings me to say that there are things in that original song that are slurs, that are unacceptable language today. And there are a couple of places in this presentation, visually possibly, and possibly in words, but I try to be very careful about it, where those slurs reappear. And we all know that they are wrong, and people have known that for a really long time, but that they persisted and were and are part of our history is also, I think, crucial for us to acknowledge. So that is my trigger warning, and I will not be surprised if some people feel uncomfortable, and I apologize, but I also think it's important. So I guess I should start with how does a book start, right? And it's amazing to come to the end of 6 years of working on a project like this, but it always has a beginning. Like many of you, I learned Stephen Foster's songs in school. I think I learned some of them on the recorder, pretty sure, in music class. And My Old Kentucky Home, the song, materialized every year at this beautiful, the most beautiful time of year in Kentucky. Kind of mysteriously, but powerfully. And one year when I was a child, at that time of year, I was home reading, and I was reading my a book that some of you maybe have also read that I'm somewhat ashamed about because it is a very problematic text, called Gone with the Wind. The scene was that Atlanta was falling to Union forces, and the family, the white family and their enslaved people were sort of crowded into this townhouse belonging to Aunt Pitty Pat. And the mood was pretty glum, pretty grim. Sherman was about to come, and no one was sure what would happen. Everyone was very afraid, the white people at least. And Scarlett and Rhett sat down at the piano at the parlor, and they started to sing. And they sang from My Old Kentucky Home, but they sang verses that I had never heard. They sang part of the third verse, which is on your sheet, which is about just a few more days for to tote the weary load. No matter, 'twill never be light. Just a few more days till we totter in the road. Then my old Kentucky home, good night. And I think I hummed into my head, at least maybe I didn't out loud, but into my head, that verse to the music that I already knew so well. But I was also humming into my head the misunderstanding of what the song was about. I thought it was about this. Ragged soldiers. Here's Ashley coming home to Melanie in a still from the 1938 film. Ragged soldiers struggling back to homesteads and families from the war. Confederate soldiers. The irony that I thought about, that's what it was about, will I hope be very clear in a moment. I also didn't know then that Margaret Mitchell actually loved this song so much that she almost titled her book, Tote the Weary Load. And I think that also is something interesting to contemplate. And for many, many years after that afternoon on a spring Kentucky day in my bedroom, I didn't know either that the sentimental and celebratory anthem that we all know so well was a song about this. Slavery, the slave trade, the commerce in human flesh that broke millions of hearts and bodies. There is no ambiguity in this if you read those 1853 lyrics, and nothing to celebrate in it either. So, taking the fact that I thought as a child that it was about Confederate soldiers, poor Confederate soldiers coming home, victimized, worn out, barely alive from their tragic efforts at the front, but it was in fact about hundreds of years of one of the great sins of humanity, is an irony that has given me great pause. How did it become our state song, our Derby anthem, and something that made me and countless others with my skin color weep? Answering that question, or beginning to, meant digging into the origin story of one of America's most all-American products, certainly within its popular culture. Our country's contorted journey through slavery and Jim Crow and racial bigotry is not a simple one. And I don't want ever to oversimplify how complicated and contorted it is. But much of it was processed by our people through something called blackface minstrelsy. This originated in the 1830s when Stephen Foster himself, the author of the song, was a boy. I cannot express strongly enough how dominant a form of entertainment this was. It's really, I don't think there is a comparison to today of how popular blackface minstrel and ubiquitous it was, especially in our cities and towns across the nation in those first 50 years. And it was also our chief export to the world. And I was talking to a friend earlier who has direct experience with that. It was known all over the world, all over the globe, as something all American, exciting, fun, fascinating, unique. And I hope we all know that blackface minstrelsy involved white men blacking their faces and performing on stages, singing, dancing, doing jokes and skits as well, pretending to be Black people for the entertainment of white audiences. So that's all clear. And that enjoyment and entertainment did not die quickly. It did fade in the 20th century, but this is from a 1950s PTA benefit in Petersburg, Virginia. And this is how ladies, and the song, we all know the chorus is "Lady, weep no more, my lady." This is how ladies were depicted in blackface minstrel shows by cross-dressing white men in Cork, mocking Black women as either desirable and over-sexualized yellow gals or harmless and all-loving mammies. And so here we are in 1853. The most popular minstrel troupe in the nation was called Christie's Minstrels, led by a man named Edwin P. Christie. His group played every single day, year in, month, week, year in and out in New York on Broadway to about 1,500 people a day. And I'm not going to go into the imagery too much in this talk, but I welcome your questions about it later. And as you can see, Stephen Foster's original edition of My Old Kentucky Home was as sung by. They had an exclusive arrangement before it was actually printed to sing the song. So this is how close Stephen Foster was to the world of minstrelsy in his work. So much has been forgotten by those whose interest lies in forgetting and papering over our past. Stephen Foster, here he is. A key point, I've given you some very simple facts about his life, but a key point is that all of this song and this practice of minstrelsy originated outside of Kentucky. It started in the urban North. It was not a Kentucky creation. In the course of my research about Foster, I also learned that he, at times in his career, and it wasn't a long career because he died at age 37, he tried to distance himself from the coarsest elements of blackface minstrelsy. So like any genre, there might be some parts of it that are more, upstanding looking, and some that are less so. And certainly if you look online and look at different images of blackface minstrelsy, some will be very shocking to you and some will seem perhaps less shocking. He wanted to make his music safe for consuming in middle-class parlors like the one here. That is because the people who lived in those middle-class parlors were the ones who had the money to buy sheet music. And in 1850s, the only way Stephen Foster could make money off of his remarkable gift to write melody was by selling sheet music. So he married a sweet melody to a brutal but inauthentic tale, because so much of minstrel music was about plantation life. So this was very normal. There are many, many others like it. To a brutal but inauthentic tale in the voice of a Black Kentuckian. Foster sentimentalized slavery into a soothing concoction for white consumption, whether it was bawdy in the minstrel show or bourgeois. Textbooks call Stephen Foster the father of American music. How appropriate. So my focus tonight is really not on the origins of this song or its early course through our culture. I'm going to focus, and all of that is told in the book, and I really hope you'll read it and tell people about it as well. But my focus is on the way Kentucky 100 years ago hitched its star to a blackface hit. Turn of the century Kentucky, to outsiders, looked like this. This is the Hatfields in 1897. And it was pretty well understood by the powers that be in Kentucky that they could use a makeover. In 1900, just a few years after this stereotypical, terrifying image of Klan violence was published, the governor of Kentucky, the elected governor, was assassinated on the grounds of the state capitol. Kentucky looked like a dangerous place to live, to do business, and even to visit. My old Kentucky home was no more about Kentucky than Oh, Susanna was about Alabama, both places that Stephen Foster spent zero to almost zero time in his life. But in a time of national white reunification, again, this turn of the century from the 19th to the 20th, and this was a time of surging success for those amazing daughters of the Confederacy who managed to rewrite the history of slavery and Civil War into a gallant lost cause. During that time, Jim Crow solidified. This is the entire social practice, many, many elements of it that stole Black Americans' votes, blocked them from access to education and jobs, and terrorized them with extra-legal and legal violence as well. White Kentucky leaders during this time of reunification and Jim Crow legislation and practices stumbled upon the fact that Stephen Foster's old song, again, by a man from Pittsburgh that had been on stages all over the country, had this ability to bring North and South together in a happy way because white people wanted to move on and do business, get along. And that it as a song, as sort of an artifact of the past, brought, quote, more positive publicity to the state than any other one thing. But there was a little problem here. The only dwellings that Stephen Foster mentioned in his song, which you can refer to again if you like, are cabins where enslaved people lived. But there was nothing more removed from an enslaved person's cabin than this, the Kentucky home that was erected, a great sort of white wedding cake of a mansion that represented the state of Kentucky in 1904 at the World's Fair in St. Louis. I see this as very symbolic. It's the first time that the state consciously embraced the Kentucky home phrasing at an official event like this that I have found, at least a major one. And in fact, it was a great success because that World's Fair was a big deal. Hundreds of thousands of people went. And this was the second most visited attraction in the whole place, next to the Missouri building, of course. So what did they do? They made my old Kentucky home the theme. There was a player piano inside this building that had doors on all four sides, and it played the song continuously every single day for month after month after month. There were 17 versions, and I think some people might have gone bananas by the end, but anyway, then they also handed out thousands of sheet music, copies of the sheet music of my old Kentucky home for people to take home as souvenirs. And they even recruited, there were more, but they also recruited the recently vanquished and also nearly naked tribes people from the Philippines to sing this American favorite. This is from 1904 as well. So where did they get the idea for this mansion to be the old Kentucky home? Well, about 40 miles south of Louisville in Bardstown, some of you may be aware, there is a place called Federal Hill, now known as the old Kentucky home, State Park. But for 10 years by 1904, rumors have been going around that this was the place where My Old Kentucky Home, the song, had been written by Stephen Foster himself while a guest to the people of the house, the Rowan family. I can tell you that is not true right now. And if you want to, get into it with me, I'm happy to elaborate. But it was there and the rumors were there. So I got to know this guy pretty well. His name is Young E. Allison. He was I think he's just a fascinating Kentuckian. He was creative, he was committed, he wrote essays and librettos, he was a journalist, he was politically engaged, and his papers are upstairs. So I spent quite a bit of time with him. And he, in the late teens and early 1920s, just made it his business toward the end of his life, he was starting to retire, to lift up someone he considered to be an American genius, Stephen Foster, and at the same time, boost his state's image and its economy. Now remember, Kentucky is a poor state. We need the help we can get. That was certainly his way of thinking. And do that with a song that felt inviting, nostalgic and reassuring, old, exotic, Kentucky, and universal, home. Allison could find no better site for the shrine that he wanted to erect to Stephen Foster than this one that I just showed you, a place where visitors could honor the master songwriter. And this crumbling mansion, while not perfect in his mind, and it was old at least, and it was from Kentucky, and it was from 1818, built by slaves. Allison went straight to the top for help. There's a newly elected governor named Edwin P. Morrow, who appointed a commission to study the possibility of acquiring this treasure in Bardstown. Throughout this book, as you who have read it or heard me talk about it for years and years know, I struggled with how to manage my own personal story. And I've already touched on the fact that I talk about that Gone with the Wind moment at the beginning, but I also decided that my story and my family's story over generations and their connection to the song and to race and to slavery belonged in this book, because I think we have to stop hiding those things. And in this case, that commission, as I'm reading upstairs, the folders that the nice people at the Filson brought me, this commission included lots of well-endowed financially people, and among them was my great-grandfather. So Robert Worth Bingham was asked to serve to decide if this would be a good thing for Kentucky to bring on and turn into a public attraction. I think actually Morrow probably was hoping that he and a few other millionaires, my great-grandfather at that time had just come into some money from the death of his second wife and had bought the Courier-Journal. So he was a good target for someone raising money. And I think Morrow hoped that these guys would just pay for it, but that's not what happened. Instead, they launched a statewide campaign. They called it Let's Buy It. It was organized by a committee, which was part of the commission. There was nothing grassroots about this. Governor Morrow had a wonderful line. Somebody wrote for him, I think. He said, "The song has tugged at your heartstrings. Let it now tug at your purse strings." And I am fascinated through many of these iterations of publicly celebrating My Old Kentucky Home at the use of the possessive, the my, the our, it's part yours, or it's part mine. And I think it's worth pausing to consider who is the possessive, who is possessing, who is being invited to belong here. And I can say for sure that in 1921, when the campaign kicked off, this was an all-white affair. But there were questions, and there were Black Kentuckians from the outset. This man, a poet, born in Louisville, but to a mother from Nelson County, which is where the old Kentucky home is, had something to say about it. Joseph S. Cotter's mother was a bound indentured servant at the Federal Hill home where My Old Kentucky Home was not written. And he went on a journey there in 1921 when there was all this hoopla going on around buying the place. And he knocked on the door. And because of the family connection, his mother had, after all, taken care of the sisters of the woman who still lived there, she gave him a tour. He left the place, though, and he said, the words of the song have to change, or it's not going to be sung much longer. This was 1921. And he did a little bit of a number, an edit on the song, and he excised the ugly words, and then he turned some of the phrases around to be empowering to Black people across the land, not just Kentucky, instead of demeaning. So for instance, he said, the time will come when the head will never bow, and so on and so forth, rather than always bow. The head and will always bow is how Foster wrote it about Black people. But he was dismissed. And in fact, he was dismissed even by some of his greatest fans who had helped him get an education, some well-meaning white Presbyterian missionaries. They called him an ultra-cultured Negro. He was just going too far. Oops. Another person I'd like to just briefly introduce is Colonel. There are a lot of colonels in these days, and there's still a lot of colonels in Kentucky. He was an honorary colonel, Colonel Labrie, Benjamin Labrie. I also met him upstairs, and he in 1923 became the original curator and site director for the brand new tourist attraction that state documents referred to as, quote, the happy home of slavery. Tourists who came to My Old Kentucky Home wanted to experience a plantation, a fantasy of a plantation. And among the steps that Labrie took, because frankly, the house itself didn't quite speak plantation well enough, was to hire a local man, his real name was Bemis Allen, to pretend to be the son of Old Black Joe. Old Black Joe being a figure in another Stephen Foster song. And Bemis Allen would tell tourists that he had been born on the place to enslave people, and he had never left the place. And this was the kind of fantasy that white Americans were just soaked up and drank up for decades and decades about slavery. In other words, making it seem like, oh, it couldn't be that bad if they hung around, right? And then in 1928, it became the state song. So 23, we have the site open, 28, the state song. And then we have Matt Winn. Some of you have heard of Matt Winn. He's the sort of amazing impresario of the Derby who took it from being a sort of third-rate horse race. There were a lot of derbies in 1907 when he came on, but he took it from that to being a national sporting event over decades. And he really made, I think, the trifecta bet on this song that represents Kentucky's decision to brand itself when he replaced the Star-Spangled Banner with My Old Kentucky Home at that moment of moments when the horses come out onto the track before the race. And it just sunk deeper and deeper. Here is Happy Chandler, former governor, then senator, singing his heart out because this was his favorite song and he loved to sing. And he did it darn well. And there's his wife singing along with him. And I guess the new governor behind him just couldn't sing because he was not singing. because everyone else is singing. And this was a national radio broadcast for NBC. So it was July 4th. We were at Stephen Foster's place where he didn't write the song in Bardstown. And there's all kinds of hoopla going on, brass bands of all kinds. And the nation is tuning in to hear Happy sing the best song of all. And this is an example of how things were presented to prospective tourists. Come to the old Kentucky home and be sung to. This was a successor to Bemis Allen. He was the next one. Bemis died. And I like to note that in the 1950s, quite remarkably, a reporter for the Courier Journal had the idea to ask some Black people, leaders in the community, what they thought about this song that some people were complaining about from time to time. And they were pretty unanimous that this was a relic and they didn't like it one bit. And it really, they wished it would not be there. But some of them also admitted that there were bigger fish to fry in Black America in the 1950s. And so, you know, they weren't going to go to the mat for this. However, one of them suggested, quote, that those ardent defenders of the Foster songs who have those wonderful, pleasant, beautiful memories of mammies and aunties and D words could show some appreciation by allowing the many descendants of those lovable people the rights to freedom, dignity, peace, and happiness as human beings. This song has always been a lie. Some of you will recognize the terrific teacher and great historic integrator of the University of Kentucky, Lyman Johnson. He taught at Central High School for decades after also integrating the law school at University of Kentucky. And he was bright as a whip, and he had no time for this song. He kept getting in trouble with the school board for teaching his students that this was just another insult from white America to their people, and that instead of standing up when it came on, they had to sit down. And then I also want to call out Blaine Hudson. Blaine Hudson was a student at University of Louisville in the late 1960s and was a leader of the Black Student Union protest. That is not him on the right. Sadly, I cannot find one of him in a protest mode. But he later he was kicked out of school for that protest. He later became the Dean of Arts and Sciences at the University of Louisville, which is a full circle that is something to certainly to celebrate. And we lost him way, way too young, but he was a historian of Kentucky and of slavery. And he wrote the press release for the Derby protest of 1969, which announced to anyone who might be bothered to listen that the D words are not gay any longer. Nobody laughed. You aren't laughing either. Everyone knew that was an insult to use that term, and they just kept singing. But 3 years later, Churchill Downs did pull the D word from its program, the Derby program that everyone would look to sing along. And most likely that was national advertisers, because by this time the Derby was a major broadcast and the NAACP had been protesting this for decades by that time. And it was the 1970s after all. And yet at Federal Hill, this kept happening. This is the mid-1970s, a terrific picture by Ted Wathen, a local Louisville master photographer, documentarian, where I think he successfully demonstrates how Kentucky heritage and white ladyhood were sold to the world at my old Kentucky home. And I just want to remind us all that this has been a taxpayer-funded site since 1923. Well, that's a terrible resolution of that picture. Sorry about that. But that is our beloved state capitol. And in 1986, after a bizarre incident that I won't go all into right now, involving a group of singing Japanese youth visiting the United States for the summer, after they sang the song at the Capitol, the legislature was prompted to remove, again, this is 1986, the offensive words from the state song. And these were well-meaning acts, both, well, certainly at the state capitol, they decided this is absolutely, who knew those were still the official words? So it was time to clean that up and be at least a little more respectful, right? But there was an ironic effect of that mostly well-meaning act. And that was that a song that already confused and mythologized us, confused white Americans and mythologized slavery, became a song that was safer, again, to sing, and very hard to determine what it was about at all, because without that one marker, that slur in it, it became very vague. But there was no deeper thinking going on in the 1980s about race in Kentucky. And the state continued to invest in this brand. It was, My Old Kentucky Home was minted, as you can see, and pasted into, and placed in everyone's palms, and then, you know, licked by so many tongues by becoming our emblem of our bicentennial in the 1990s. I even licked those stamps myself for my wedding invitations. And so our song about slavery comes around year after year, and it's becoming a little more complicated each year, it seems. But one of the more bracing aspects of my research was looking squarely at the way in which over and over, even liberal white people took steps to reinforce this song and its damaging racial mythologies. Young Allison, the guy who I read about upstairs, he was a liberal, and he instituted a state's self-conscious branding, its commitment to a song about slavery that was inauthentic from the moment it was written, and that by 1920 had come to represent, of all things, and this is a quote, the happy home that can never be destroyed, when it was a song about someone being sold away to die and never see their family again. When challenged about the truth of Foster even writing the song at that particular place in Kentucky, in Bardstown, young Allison hedged. He found ways to sort of dismiss the questions, and then he just lied. That brand worked for white Kentucky, worked in 1920. It worked emotionally, it worked financially, and it worked for decades after that. But we decide which traditions to take forward into the future. And repeating lies does not make a thing so. Repeating lies, as we all well know from 2020, is deeply perilous to democracy. A white Northern man's need to turn a buck, not Kentucky's beauties or complexities, inspired My Old Kentucky Home. But for 100 years, Kentucky has done far more than its part to turn it into what I call a sonic monument to a segregated memory. I don't think we want a segregated memory in this country anymore. I know I don't, and I don't think you do. Our favorite son, Muhammad Ali, here portrayed by Bill Luster. I try to give some credits where credit is due, of the Courier Journal. Our favorite son, according to his wife, Lonnie, never sang that song. And his friend, Bob Coleman, told me, that's not our song, that's your song. I spoke a few years ago to Dorian Hairston, a star baseball player from the University of Kentucky, Lexington born. He's now a poet and a teacher in the public school system in Lexington. He asked me, what if the state song reflected my belonging as a human being and not someone who was owned? So I'm going to revert to my teacherliness. Can I see a show of hands of anyone who has sung My Old Kentucky Home? In Germany, they don't link arms and sway together to a song about the Holocaust. In South Africa, they don't get weepy-eyed before cricket games about a song about apartheid. I do believe that continuing to sing a song of this origin that has threaded through this dark way that we have mismanaged history for ourselves in spaces that are controlled by white people, and that includes our state legislature and Churchill Downs and so many schools and basketball games and football games and on and on and on, is an act of white supremacy. Even if people don't mean it that way, even if they don't know it. And that is the point. That is the larger point. Listening carefully to this one song as it is twisted through American culture maybe can open us to acknowledging the so many other ways that unknowingly, unintentionally, but onward continually, systems of forgetting and denial have wounded our city, our state, and our nation. Those systems of denial may be our undoing. And if we are ever to sing one song, we must listen and remain with uncomfortable truths. Let's not run away from this moment. It's okay. We will get through it. We can be together in it. Let's act on what we hear and act together. Thank you.
So, are there any questions for Emily right now? Or I can ask one and get us started, but I want everybody to feel comfortable. Just ask away. Jim?
I seem to recall in the 1980s, the late Governor Chandler being involved in one or more instances where he insisted on singing the original verse. I mainly just ask you to refresh my memory. I think there was maybe 2 or 3 times where he created a little controversy by going old school on the state song.
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure of that. What I do know about Governor Chandler is that he was the traditional singer of the song on senior nights at University of Kentucky men's basketball games, which I think his son called the most emotional moment of the most emotional sport of the most emotional, I don't know, like, day in the year. I don't have the quote right, in all of Kentucky and all the world, because, that basketball means that much. And I argue that Chandler, when he did stop using the old lyrics, may have in a way been helping school a new generation or generations of Kentucky basketball fans that wasn't okay to do anymore. But he also had many examples in the 80s and 90s toward the very end of his life where he kept using the term in other settings and got into a lot of trouble for it. Yeah.
Hi, Professor Bingham. I have kind of 2 questions kind of molded into one. The first is I'm really interested in that. Was it a pin from the 1904 World's Fair? I'm curious as to what the quote, "it's part mine" means. And then my second question is, to the first man that was hired out in the Federal Hill, Kentucky home, Bemis Allen, was that his name? Did you find any similarities between him and Aunt Jemima? You know, another person that, you know, a real person that was
From
hired to-
Kentucky.
yeah, to play this character
Right.
for white consumption.
I
you know?
hadn't made the connection, and it's Emily, right?
Emma.
Emma,
yes.
sorry. Yeah, I hadn't made the connection from my book about my great aunt Henrietta, where she has a friendship with the one of the who was a Black performer who later was hired to be an official Aunt Jemima, and the Bemis Allen at my old Kentucky home. But there's ways that these books do interlock. So your first question was about it's part mine. Yeah, I think I didn't really dig into this in the text that much, but I do think there's just something about this possessiveness. And also they were selling the idea at the World's Fair. They were trying to get people to invest in Kentucky, to bring, so they're showcasing the mining and the agriculture, and, that there were schools here. So, there's civilization, and they wanted people to look like a good investment. So I think the idea of the mine is partly the sentimental mine and everyone belongs or everyone can be part of it, but also the acquisitive mine, right? The mining mine. So there's that. And then, yeah, so I think that there were lots of parallels. I mean, these minstrelized real life figures that were all through American advertising campaigns, Uncle Ben Rice. I mean, it goes on and on. There's coffee. I think Maxwell House Coffee had a huge campaign about it, showing, white people being served by, in fact, lots of bourbon brands use these same sort of uncles who were serving. So I think this is just the way it was. This is how these images from minstrelsy of mammies and uncles and other stereotype figures continued into the 20th century. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's wonderful.
Emily, we have a very large virtual audience that has joined us. So I'm representing some of their questions. So the first one came in from Keith Runyon. The president of Churchill Downs recently said that singing My Old Kentucky Home would continue because people like it. Historically, racial change has not occurred by popular vote, but usually by congressional act or court order. Would a lawsuit against the Downs be something we should consider?
Ooh. Well, I've had a lot of people ask me for marching orders, and I do, I truly, I'm not hiding behind this, but I am a historian. It is so important to me that people take different ways of attacking this particular problem. And I think there will be many, and legal could be one. I mean, the thing about Churchill Downs is they are a private corporation. They can do whatever they want. The state of Kentucky is a very different kettle of fish. And I mean, they can do whatever they want. Churchill Downs could change it tomorrow. No one is, they just decide, the way they decided to take the D word out of the lyrics in 1972. But for the state of Kentucky, it's going to be a process. And I believe in that process. But I do think pressuring private companies is a very legitimate way of expressing your political or personal views and what you want your state and your city to be represented, how you'd like them to be represented to the world. And so I encourage all paths to voicing concerns and questions and challenges about this. Yeah.
Emily, you've left me hanging. So tell me about what's going on at Federal Hill. Are you going to do a speaking tour there?
I'm very excited. On June 8th, you can come to Bardstown, Kentucky, to the Riot Bookseller, where I, with Eric King, who is a well-known anchor here, local television anchor, who is also from Bardstown, grew up there, and very, very, very familiar with my old Kentucky home and its story and its lies. He will be interviewing me, we'll be in a conversation. And one of the reasons that it's timed in June is that is when the actors for the Stephen Foster story, which is a great, also not great, a long-standing tradition in Bardstown of summer theater telling a story about Stephen Foster as in a musical. Those actors will also be convening and starting their rehearsals. So we hope that there will be a lot of discussion in Bardstown, but that city, you know, if Kentucky has gone deep with its trifecta, that city is literally submerged in my old Kentucky home. And I'm looking at a dear friend, Matthew Colin Bailey, who was the site director at my old Kentucky home for years when I was researching, and I owe him a great debt of thanks for allowing me to see into their archive. And I got to say, I kind of feel for the folks there because it is going to be very, I think it's important to do it, but it will be a challenge, and it's crucial to do it, to disentangle from that particular legacy.
Perhaps the Filson could organize a group to help protect you there. And I wonder if they have a gift shop where you could sell your books.
Well, there you go. We'll see. I might pay them a visit before the talk. Yeah.
A bit of a disclaimer, as you can tell, of my accent visit from Kentucky. But recently moved here to bring my way back to Kentucky from the north. But I came down here as a young boy buying saddlebred horses with my parents. And to me, my old Kentucky home brought me to tears, and it has a nostalgia that I thoroughly love and would hate to lose. On the other side of the coin, being here tonight and in recent years just learning about all of this. Is there a way, Doctor, to empower that song, change the lyrics, or what is a solution besides burning a bridge that could maybe build a bridge? And is that possible, or is that just a dream? But I can see that it would be hard to eradicate something that is just a very, such a strong past.
Yeah, I think nostalgia for especially parts of our demographic that aren't often allowed to feel that emotion, or it's not approved publicly to get nostalgic and think about home and people you really love and express that. I think we need to find some other ways for you and me and many of us to do that. And I think they're out there. If there had been a time when just keeping the music and changing the lyrics would work, maybe that would have worked 100 years ago. I do think that these half measures have left us with too many sores to, again, just it won't heal. And there's so many beautiful and wonderful musical talents and songs in the world. I just think, why do we cling so hard? Why? What is it? And is it about just that one song, or is it about something else that is embedded in us that we need to look at?
Very understandable.
Thank you for your question.
We have time for one last question. Yes, sir.
Get the last word.
Sure, we have time for two last questions.
That's the power of womanhood. Can I? I have so many questions, but I'm gonna break it down as close as I can. One, how did you feel when you did your research that you found that it ran deep in your blood?
Thank you. That is a very good and fair and very personal question. Researching this book was extremely hard. I felt sick a lot of the time. I spent about 4 or 5 days in the American Minstrel Show collection at Harvard University's theater archive. And that was upsetting, but really upsetting. But I think, and I felt dirty. I felt stained, but I really didn't want to come through this with shame, because I don't think that is the right, for me, that wasn't the right attitude. It wasn't going to let me drive forward. It wasn't going to let me be open and be positive about this. For instance, this whole lecture, this was a choice. This was a choice that was made, and I think we can choose. So it was very bracing for me, for sure. And we're all want to be proud of our ancestors. And there are things I am very proud of about myself and my ancestors. But I think, you know, why do we need to pretend that we are proud of everything? I mean, we're human beings and we make mistakes, and we can learn from them. So that's where I came. Then I will just say one more thing, that 2020 happened. And I was in the midst of writing and rewriting. And I just felt that I had been living in this knowledge of systems in a way that I hadn't personally experienced. And then I saw it play out in my city with people being shot at and killed, and a woman's, you know, Kentucky home being violated in a way that it never should have, ever. It was, and I was extremely angry. I still am very angry about it. Yeah.
And then one more, and I'm gonna stop.
I need to make my answers shorter.
Yeah, no, your answer was good, because that is, I mean, that's, how can you present this truth and understand that that is a part of who you are too? And now that we're in this council culture, to hide the truth is always painful. But if change is ever going to happen, it has to be rooted in truth. You know, because, you know, as they say, tell the truth, shame the devil, one of them old sayings. All right, and then the last one, I guess recently I've had the I don't know what you want to call it. I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of upscale derby parties where the who's who of Louisville and the who's friends from around the world come to celebrate the Derby. Everybody's in their fine wear and beautiful hats and big dresses. And all of the servants are black males. And then every now and then someone may say, no, I'm here for the party. You know, I'm here for the party, not to pick up something, not to go get something. So that's a question from, you know, a question for the who's who, that when they have these parties, how is that we talk about this, but then your servants are black males and you perpetuating the story of my old Kentucky home? That's my question.
Well, I'm going to leave that question for us all to ponder, because I think it's a very fair one. Thank you.
I just had a really quick question. On your slide of what the minstrel show, I was very curious about the font in particular, and immediately thought of like all the other bourbon companies who use that very old racist font. And so now I'm wondering, who else utilizes this font? Is this something that you looked into? And how do we get those companies to stop using this font that is very much rooted in racism?
Wow, you're way ahead of me on graphic. I bet someone has written about race and fonts, but I am not aware of it, and I would love to know. But I mean, there's nostalgia it's expressed in so many ways, right? And I just published an essay. I did a version of it for the Fraser for their newsletter, but I just published it in Lit Hub today about the material culture of this song, the stuff of it, that we, you have a pillow that says my old Kentucky home that you put your head on, or you have a compact case that somebody, put their makeup in with a picture of that house with my old Kentucky home on it, and they made themselves feel prettier, touching that. And so I think that, whether it's fonts or stuff, the answer is, it is all through us. This story is these wrongs and these stereotypes and these ways that unfortunately nostalgia got included in them, or embedded in them, is through the culture. And it's not surprising, because that is what we have been as a society. We have been a segregated and bigoted society. There's just no way around that. That's the fact, right? So thank you for the thought, but I wish I had a better answer.
Dr. Emily Bingham, thank you so much.